it up. Keep the party going. Here we go.
Are you taking us to the Howl, Charles?
Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I don't know. I'll have to wait and see.
There it is.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
It's gonna be one of those days.
One of those days. In the books, Howl episode confirmed. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well. Today, we see the return of one of our Hallmark series.
Right. It's time for a little Would You Rather Fantasy Edition. We've done a few of these, Charles.
That's right. You know, these are always fun to have a little spoiler-free, no reading required, just to see what kind of realm we can take the show. You know, it's like we love to talk about the books. You know, the books are the bread and butter of FTF. But every once in a while, we just like to sit down and have a friendly little chat about fantasy.
And that's what we're here to do today. So
That's right.
this will be a spoiler-free episode.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's just get into it, Charles.
I agree. You have more questions prepared than me, so you may as well start and we'll alternate.
Well, I'm going to come in hot
All right.
because I got a big question for you.
Oh, boy.
Charles, imagine you and I are out fishing and we stumble upon a djinn and you get
Ooh.
a wish here. And that wish could make one of two books appear completed that you could read.
Ooh, no, you didn't. No,
Yeah,
you
here I
didn't.
come. I have a bet you know what's coming here.
I have
Would
a guess.
Would you rather read The Doors of Stone, Book 3 of the Kingkiller Chronicle, completed? You know, Patrick has had all the time he needs and he's created the product he's proud of, or The Winds of Winter by George R.
I knew
R.
this was
Martin,
coming.
fully completed.
Once you phrased the question, I was like, here it comes, George or Patrick. Oh, man. Well, I've kind of thought about this, bizarrely enough. I was like, man, I wonder which one. You know, it's obviously great comparison because they're both highly anticipated, next installments of these two of the most popular modern fantasy series, right? And these books, people have been waiting for like 10 plus years for these books. So the excitement around them is very high. So it makes it hard to pick. I mean, come on, Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, that's like a cultural phenomena, and George's writing is incredible, and I've always enjoyed reading it and going back to it and, you know, reflecting on it. I always realize how much I like it. I sometimes forget how much I like Game of Thrones, and you might hear more about that in the upcoming episodes of Friends Talking
Beautiful
Fantasy.
tease,
Little tease,
Charles.
beautiful tease,
Nailed it.
And then you have, Patrick Rothfuss, man. Think about it. Doors of Stone, the conclusion, the final book in this trilogy. We'd get the ending. Worthy of noting that Winds of Winter would not be the end. There's more to go after that. So
that's a critical consideration.
Another critical situation is we have a Game of Thrones to show, and we have the story completed, and we've seen a version of it. And although nothing is, set in stone, if you will,
Nailed it.
Although nothing
Not even
is
the doors.
no, although nothing is set in stores, we'll leave no doors closed. I have a feeling that the showrunners for Game of Thrones had all the important plot points that will be replicated in the books, and I think the books will deliver on better prose and have more time to flesh out where all these story points are going, but I think the points are the same. So I feel like I know that story, which is why I'm more inclined to go towards Doors of Stone, and that's the book I'd want to see. Let's finish Kingkiller. Let's figure out where all this is going, and then we can release tons and tons of episodes around our discussion of the final of the Kingkiller Chronicles. So that's, for me, it's Doors of Stone. It's the finale. And it's only because I don't know the ending, and it will be the last one. So my return on like story per book, significance per book, I feel is higher for Kingkiller.
I think you've chosen wisely there, Charles. You named all the considerations that were going through my head. I thought maybe you would end up picking The Winds of Winter, just because I know how much you love A Song of Ice and Fire and George R.R. Martin. And I think when you step back and consider that book 3 of the Kingkiller Chronicle would close this thing out, while The Winds of Winter, yeah, you could get that, but you'd still be waiting for the last installment.
Right.
I think
that's
Doors
a
of Stone
huge piece.
I think
and
Doors of
listen,
Stone is...
I'm going to be real with all you friends out there right now.
Be real with them, Charles.
For every book that's come out of A Song of Ice and Fire, like I feel like Dance with Dragons is perhaps one of the weaker ones of the series. I feel like his story is just getting wider and wider and wider. He's introducing more characters. The characters are getting further apart. It's harder and harder to see where it's going. And I don't see that coming back together anytime soon in Winds of Winter. So I think it's, I don't think it's going to be as exciting. One, because everyone knows where the story's going thanks to the show. And then two, George has expanded it so large that, I'm looking forward to it. And George is a terrific writer, and everything he's written has been great. But I do see a little bit of diminishing returns reading George right now. And that's just the reality. Just keeping it real.
Someone's got to, Charles.
Because those first 3 books, masterpieces. But as we go on, we start to wonder, like, what's happening and when are we going to get back? When that Brienne chapter comes up and you're like, okay, well, here we go again. And she's like, oh, I'm in the wrong area looking for these people. Like, maybe I'll find them. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, we know that this is just going to...
Brienne takes a shot out of nowhere.
Well, come on, man. You know what I'm talking about.
No idea whatsoever, Charles. But
oh, okay. You're gonna do me like that.
Do you know I love every Brienne chapter I've ever read? But
all right. I'm gonna move on then. I think we're both decided. Doors of Stone.
Yes.
Because I'm excited about my question here. So,
I'm excited
breaking news in the fantasy world, and well-timed as well. We all know that Burning God by R.F. Kuang has just come out, and we have dropped our Buddy Read episode on it very recently. And what an exciting moment that was. And this piece of news dropped that, the Poppy War series was picked up and is going to become a show, right? So this is exciting news. But what we don't know is what is this show gonna be? People have mentioned that R.F. Kuang has tweeted kind of things that she thought would be cool to see. One of them being an animated series. But my question to you is, would you rather see an animated Poppy War TV show a la like Last Airbender, or take your pick, or a live action series a la Game of Thrones?
I mean, I think a lot of it depends on how well produced, especially a live action one would be, right?
Yes.
Speaking of Avatar: The Last Airbender, we know that there was a live action, one of those by M. Night Shyamalan that, for a variety of reasons, was quite bad. And
to be fair, though, that's an adaptation of an cartoon or an anime, which those never work. But this is an adaptation of a book. Could be different.
So you said a la Game of Thrones, so shall we imagine it's getting that kind of funding behind it and that kind of
acting, like it's going to be on HBO, and it's, going to be a whole thing.
In your hypothetical, just to make that clear, so people don't think we're breaking
news here. No, we're not breaking news. It's a hypothetical, and it's not guaranteed that it's going to be good, right? Like, you read the news, it's like, Poppy War is going to be a gritty live-action TV show. Like, is that more the headline you're hoping for, or you're going to say, these people are going to animate it into a cartoon like anime like show.
I'd love to see it live action, Charles.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's such a. I mean, I don't know. I've seen really gritty, dark animes and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think of Attack on Titan does it really well. And
Yeah.
look, if they could do something like that for the Poppy War, then sure, like go for it. I would love to watch it. But maybe I'm just kind of a live action person in terms of I tend to like that a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see if they could have the funding to make some of these things that need to happen. I won't spoil anything, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that they'd need to make happen that would require some funding there. If they had it and they could do it, then sure, go for it. I want to see it happen live action, Charles.
I thought that's the direction you were going to go, and just because of your history of the shows that you've liked to watch, and I kind of agree. I think the sky's the limit with a live action show, right? Like, if it's good, then it has the potential to be amazing. So that to me is but it's also high risk. Like, it would be so easy to say we're going to make this live action and then they just can't get the effects right. They can't get the scenes right. It's a very ambitious project for live action. So unless someone with a very clear vision and millions of dollars is going to make it, you might have a little trouble making it good. But if they had like a Game of Thrones level budget, then I think they could do great things.
Sure.
But most shows don't get a Game of Thrones level budget, so it's kind of risky. But that's what I'm hoping they'll go for. That being said, I think there's tweets out there of RF Kuang being like, "Yeah, it would be cool to see it as like an Avatar style anime. Like that's something that she kind of has envisioned and thought would be cool." And I think if you get the right art style and you do make it more mature and keep it at that level, then I think it would be super interesting as well. I also think it's more of a safer bet too, because you can make it hyper stylized without having to worry about effects or things like that. But I do think live action is like the best that the show could be, is like a super like high end live action show would be the best.
I agree, Charles. As the great Michael Jordan once said, the roof is the ceiling when it comes to live action.
That's what he said.
Did he say the ceiling is the roof? Either way, it doesn't make sense. So we'll keep roll. That is a Michael Jordan. One of those is a Michael Jordan quote, for the record.
It would be weird if he just made it up.
No. All right. I got a good one for you, Charles.
Lay it on me.
So we recently recorded an episode called Friends Creating Fantasy, where you and I randomly generated a book title from typical fantasy words, and also we randomly generated a couple characters from archetypes and character traits.
Who could forget the Raven?
Yeah, no one could ever forget the Raven from the Raven's Fantasy.
No.
And I do recommend, if you're into these kind of Friends spoiler-free episodes like this Would You Rather, I think you'd probably get a kick out of Charles and I trying to improvise the story in a Friends Creating Fantasy episode. So we made a story called The Raven's Fantasy, which was kind of a corruption arc type story about, I think there were elements.
It was a reverse corruption also, kind of.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I want to spoil the Raven's Fantasy.
Oh, yeah, we're keeping it spoiler-free here.
Yeah. But I think there were some undercurrents of themes of, like, at least power dynamics, if not even, like, colonialism and stuff like that, that probably someone with a more deft hand than us would be able to explore well. I grabbed some people, or I didn't grab them. I thought of some people who have more deft writerly hands than we have, Charles. And I'm wondering if our vision of that story we outlined called The Raven's Fantasy could become a reality and not just a fantasy through being written by one of the following three authors.
Yeah. Spicing it up.
And then who would you choose to write The Raven's Fantasy, Charles?
Oh, this is exciting.
Joe Abercrombie.
Oh, yeah.
R.F. Kuang.
Oh.
or number one New York Times best-selling author Brandon Sanderson.
Wow. So this is tricky. So Joe Abercrombie, The First Law trilogy, which I love, and we're currently in the process of reading, by the way. So be sure to come tune back in soon to hear us talk about the First Law series.
I'm pumped for.
Which I am pumped for. I just started reading it. I'm on the first Jezzel chapter, and it's like I forgot how much fun the experience of reading those books is. So much fun. And then we have R.F. Kuang, who is, really fresh modern voice in fantasy, and she's mastered the corruption arc, and she's got this gritty violence about her. She understands these colonialism moments that you're talking about. Our story starred a female protagonist, and her story, Rin is a fantastic female protagonist, so would also be a fantastic choice. And then you have Brandon Sanderson, who could write anything and make it a wonderful experience.
And he'd crank it out quick.
Yeah.
I mean, the Ravens fantasy before you know it.
Yeah, he'd already be like Ravens fantasy draft 10%. You're like, whoa, okay, we're going.
By the end of this episode, he'd probably have it at 10% if he, if only we could contact him to start writing.
For sure. I mean, author of Mistborn and The End of the Wheel of Time and Stormlight Archives.
Yeah.
So all these amazing epic works of fantasy, and he's proven to be a plotting master, and he's the kind of guy who would do so well in a fantasy novel generator, because he has a theory about plotting and preparing to write a novel that would make him do really amazing things with a premise like we had for the Ravens fantasy. So
right. Sanderson is an outliner in how he writes his plots, and that very much shows. He says he discovery writes the characters along the way, but he knows exactly where the plot is going from the start.
Right.
R.F. Kuang writes by the seat of her pants, apparently. And I think, I don't know, actually, with Abercrombie, I do think he outlines. So we might want to keep all that in mind. Yeah.
I see that. If you had asked me a week ago before I started rereading First Law, I would have maybe been tempted to go with with R.F. Kuang, only because the story that we created has a lot of interesting parallels to Poppy War. But I'm reading Joe Abercrombie. I'm like, this guy gets me. Gets what I'm looking for in the voice of an author. He's so funny but so dry, and the observations that he makes, the observations that his characters make, the philosophy that he has is so in tune with how I think about stuff myself. I'm like, this is great. And so I think we're just aligned so much in what I like to read and how unique of a voice that is, and how unique my taste is, and Joe Abercrombie just nails it. That I think we've got
special, Charles.
Yeah, so I think we got to.
Such a unique taste.
What?
You have such a unique taste, Charles.
I'm not saying that I'm saying it's the fact that everyone has unique tastes, and so when an author nails it, it's a pretty impressive thing to see.
Yeah.
Because no one writes very few people write with those sensibilities like Joe does. Where he's not afraid to get super violent. He's not afraid to get a little silly. He's not afraid to put a lot of effort into plots and reveals. And it's interesting how he balances it all. And that's why I would say Joe Abercrombie. I think
wow.
His voice out of these three authors is most what I would in my wildest dreams would try to have a voice like that. So that's why I would go with Joe. Although I think any of these people would be amazing. I think,
you can't go wrong.
You can't go wrong, exactly. But I'd probably pick Joe. But
you've got three right choices.
Three amazing
Charles,
ghostwriters
here. Correctly among your three right choices.
I don't even have to ask what you would choose.
Yeah, well, I was interested to hear you say so many just. Really, really you've always praised Joe Abercrombie, but just to say what you just said is another level of praise, I think. on Joe Abercrombie because I've kind of been the Joe Abercrombie guy on the show in the
Yeah, well,
past. So to hear
it's
you
been
go
many
off
years
like
since
that,
I've read Joe Abercrombie, and now that I'm reading him after reading back to back like 6 other series, and so we've read Sanderson, we've read Kwong, we've read Rothfuss, we've read Andrei Sapkowski, we've read a ton of books. We've read Tolkien, and now I'm reading
yes, we have.
Abercrombie, and now I think I have new like every series I go into now is fresh off the experience of another author. So I don't think I had that, and I always liked Abercrombie's voice. Like I would have told you this 2 weeks ago about like why I like Abercrombie, and we'll see if we'll see how it goes. But I just maybe it's just because he's the author I'm reading right now that I'm picking him. Who knows? But I'm into it, and he's my choice.
That's awesome, Charles. I mean, can't go wrong. I think, first of all, I'd probably choose Joe Abercrombie for, and maybe not any of these questions, but you probably wouldn't want to include Joe Abercrombie if you were giving me one of these because I'd be very likely to pick him for any of them. I think, though, R.F. Kuang would do a great job of hitting on those elements of the, like you said, corruption arc and the colonialism aspect. I think like those were kind of maybe subtext in what we were outlining there.
And this idea of like throwing tropes out the window for the sake of the individuality of the character, I think is also a really interesting thing that Kuang does. Kuang like bulldozes through tropes and like plot tropes and things like that to characterize her protagonist, and I think that's something that we were kind of building up in our plotting of the Ravens fantasy.
I agree, Charles. And Brandon Sanderson feels like he's not getting the same.
I mean, I feel like
Ravens
Sanderson is the safest bet. Like, look, if you want a book to be on the New York Times bestseller and have everyone love it for sure, like just have Sanderson write it. So, that is that's
I think though what Charles, what I was thinking is like we basically robbed, if we're you and I, Charles, two very amateurs in this arena, hand Brandon Sanderson an outline. I mean, any of these people, if we hand them an outline, they're gonna be like, "Are you kidding me?" But I feel like we've taken the thing that Brandon Sanderson is best at away from him, which is plotting all of these things out and creating a story that's going to unfold in a very satisfying way.
That's fair.
So it's like, that's why I think Sanderson is as appealing as some of the others in terms of like, oh, like we wrote this for you, now you write it. It's like, shouldn't I be the person who's plotting this all out? I'm really, really, really good at that.
Right. Yeah, we should just have Brandon Sanderson plot it and then write it. I think he'd be a terrific ghostwriter.
I think he's doing great as a regular writer anyway. So
it's very true. All right, so shall we move on?
Let's keep rolling.
All right, here's my question. So this one's a little more based, like a little more on the traditional would you rather kind of format here. So as anyone who's following the show would know, we just wrapped up Book of the Ancestor by Mark Lawrence, and what a ride that was.
Friend of the show, Mark Lawrence.
Friend of the show. Once dubbed a great listen by Mark Lawrence is the show that you're listening to right now.
Red Sister. Yeah, Red Sister. Our Red Sister episode was called A Great Listen.
That's right. So, when it comes to Book of the Ancestor that, we can talk about it in a way that the author thinks is great. So that's where we are.
And a listen.
And a listen. Yeah, exactly. We are an audio format. So no denying that. So I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to ask you a Book of the Ancestor themed would you rather. And
don't be remiss, Charles.
I will not, because the question basically is, which tribal ability would you rather have? And just for our listeners at home who may not have read Book of the Ancestor, I'll go through them super quickly. You have the Hunska, which is basically superhuman speed. Garant, superhuman strength, and I also think you're just a bigger individual. Margil, which is elemental magics, and then Quantal, which is larger magics, walking the path, which is channeling like the universe's energy, you know? So those are your choices.
Right. Yeah. So Margils can do all the shadow work and all the sneaky stuff.
Yeah, the
I think though
daggers
it's
and
like,
the
am I in the Book of the Ancestor world or am I
No,
me?
you're in this world. You're you. You wake up tomorrow with one of these.
Okay. So then it kind of takes some of the use of some of these things out of the equation, right? Like, do I need the strength of a gerent? Uh,
Well, no,
what's
you
that gonna do in my day-to-day
you
life?
could pick
So
up a
I think,
sport and get a Nike deal or something. I don't know.
right. Well, I think that Hunska swiftness would probably be more useful because
Yeah,
if you're a full-blood Garant or Gerent in Book of the Ancestor, you're usually kind of oafy too.
yeah,
So
you're like you're almost like a mini giant, if that makes any sense. You're like noticeably bigger than a human being should be.
yeah, it'd be like 9 feet tall. But yeah, full blood's too oafy and clumsy usually. So I think not really what I'm looking for
That's where my
there.
mind
So
went to right away. Garrett out of the mix.
yeah. So then the remaining ones, I think that like walking the path would be really, really cool. I think the possibilities that are allowed by the quantal powers are so almost endless. The roof is the ceiling when it comes to that one, Charles.
The
So
roof is the ceiling.
so I think that, and you could do the thread, like pull people's threads and stuff. I mean, I don't know. It's a little bit same lines of like that emotional manipulation stuff we've talked about before. Whereas like, is it kind of messed up? But I would use it for good if I could.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know. I'd have to be just thoughtful about the ethics of that. But at least like walking the path. I mean, if you walk the path, you could do all sorts of interesting stuff with the power that comes from it.
Hmm.
So, I mean, you could like shoot lightning and things like that. Or, I mean,
Glow, like I don't know,
sure.
travel around. Yeah, store
And
energy.
create thread bonds, Charles. You and I could have a thread bond.
Oh, great! Like we don't see enough of each other already.
Yeah. I could, Charles, I could take over your body and I could be both podcasters like I've always dreamed
Great
of.
point, Dylan. You're so smart.
Yeah, yeah, there'd be a lot of that going on.
Good thing you're the face of the show.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that's
I
true.
think Quantal. So that's where I'm going. I mean, Hunsk would be cool for, I'd get better at tennis. That's pretty much the main thing
Yeah.
I'd be thinking. I'd be like a pro tennis player, but I'd go Quantal.
That's fair. That's fair. I'm on the fence between Margil and Quantal. Margil seems kind of cool. You got shadow work. You've got like the the invisible daggers coming out of your hands, and you've got all these cool things you can do. That like aren't Margils also the empaths that can like
Yeah.
be
And they
like
can
you
use
will
the
let us
Force,
in. Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Like
Mind tricks.
these are, yeah, the Jedi mind tricks, really.
Yes.
It's like, these aren't the droids you're looking for bit, is
Yeah.
what they can do.
Exactly. So that's kind of fun too. And I just think like there's more day to day practical applications of being a Margil. You're like
That's fair.
you're trying to like open this bag of like chips or something, and it's like really like tightly glued. You just get that flaw blade out, cut it right off, and then
That's
you're
interesting.
in the chip bag. Like you're there, and you never have to worry about having a knife on you ever again. You can also just
Charles,
be
how
like
often are you trying to open chip bags in your day-to-day life?
Too
You're like,
often.
if only I had flaw blades. It's like, have you tried pulling on both sides of it and opening it that way?
I've tried everything. It would be easier if I had flaw blades. So
Okay.
think of all the stuff you could. I don't know. I just think the day to day stuff with them.
It's way more practical.
Yeah. Although I think Quanto would be pretty wild stuff, but I don't know if it's very dangerous also to walk the path. So I think Margil is a safer bet.
if I just wake up tomorrow and I can walk the path, I probably mess it up. I'm not being trained by Mistress Path or anything like that. So,
Mhm.
and I think Marjorie, I didn't think about the empath thing. And I'm a counseling psych PhD program, and I am a therapist. It's another hat I wear at times. So, actually, the empath powers would be super helpful for me in that role. So I
That's true.
actually am changing, Charles. I think you're
Oh, I
onto
changed
something.
your mind. Yes.
Marjol,
Woo.
an empath.
Marjol empaths. Yeah, being an empath would be very cool.
Yeah,
That's it.
no, that's
We
good
did it.
stuff, Charles.
Cool.
We did it.
We did it. So,
Yeah.
do you? I'm out of questions. Do you want to give us one more, or should we call it a day?
I can throw you one, Charles, while we're on the Book of the Ancestor thing.
Okay.
Would you rather explore the caves beneath Sweet Mercy Convent with Nona
Oh.
Gray from the Book of the Ancestor,
Mm-hmm.
or explore the Underthing beneath the university with Ari from the Kingkiller Chronicle?
Underthing with Ari from the Kingkiller Chronicle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct.
I mean, I would love to hang out with Nona Gray, but the caves don't do anything for me. If anything, they're kind of scary and treacherous. Whereas the Underthing is super interesting, and there's mystery around it and history around it, and which you could say the same thing for the caves, I guess, to be fair. But I don't know, there's something more like mystical about the Underthing, whereas the caves are like the caves, like don't go in there. So, and then Ari's just super unique, and I guess I'd feel safe around Ari as long as I don't like move her stuff around. Then I think I'd be cool.
Charles, you'd be stomping about in that Underthing.
Oh
We've
my-
seen the picture of you that looks like Bigfoot. And
But if I'm going with her, it wouldn't be so bad. Like Quoth gets to go down there sometimes.
he does, but Quoth has accomplished a lot of things, Charles, that I don't know if you'll be able to.
You don't think
quite
I can
get
live
there.
up to Quoth's adventure in the Underthing?
I think there's just a lot of things Quoth has done that, who knows, Charles, you've got lots of time, but I don't know if you'll ever quite be Charles the Bloodless.
Yeah. Well, I'm still not sold on how, big of a deal Quoth really is, We'll have to wait and see. But that's
when you get your hands on Doors of Stone, Charles,
Yes, right.
from that
Yeah.
gin wish that
Yeah.
you'll be able to see.
Oh man, if
So-
only I had that gin wish.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a fun little romp, I guess you could say, into the world of Would You Rather Fantasy Edition on the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast.
That it was. Shout out to any fans who've made it this far. If you are listening and you want to shoot us some sort of would you rather question, then there's a lot of places that you can go to do that, aren't there, Charles?
Oh, there are. We've got the outro music pumping. This is the point of the show where we tell you exactly where those places are. Big one is Twitter. Big one. And that's on the FTF podcast with a number 1 at the end. So definitely check us out there. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at the FTF podcast. You can also shoot us an email. I don't know if anyone's ever shot us an email, but you could. You could be the first. And that's the FTF podcast at gmail.com.
Telling on yourself, Charles, that no one sends us emails. They do tweet at us.
We get tweeted at, just ask Mark Lawrence, okay? We get tweeted at.
Ooh,
But,
nice name drop.
but yeah, we'll see about those emails. If you like the show and you just happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what kind of options do they have, Dylan, to show their love?
They can toss 5 stars to our podcast. Did you mention
5
Facebook
stars to our
and Insta
podcast.
yet?
Yes, I mentioned it right after Twitter. It was the second thing.
Okay. At the FTF podcast.
Oh, okay, may as well say it twice. Why not?
Yeah. Toss 5 stars to our
toss 5
podcast.
stars to our podcast on Apple Podcasts. Like all of our stuff. Listen to all the episodes. Download them all anyway. And thank you guys for listening. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.